On the sunny morning of September 3, 1978, a disturbing find occurred at an illegal landfill about a mile south of an old bridge in Rankin County, Mississippi. The discovery was the lifeless body of a young woman, wrapped in a blanket. Once a serene and picturesque area near the Byram swinging bridge, it was now the grim setting of a crime scene. The victim's body had been callously dumped amidst piles of garbage, as though her very existence had been discarded like yesterday's refuse. Despite the best efforts of the investigators, there were no clues at the scene to help identify the victim, and she had likely been deceased for several days before being found. She was a nameless victim without any family and friends to mourn her loss. The gruesome details of her death were not immediately clear, but investigators did note that she had suffered a severe blow to the head. The woman was completely nude with no personal effects to offer even a hint at her identity. It was as if she had simply appeared out of thin air only to meet a tragic end at the hands of a heartless killer. Who was she, and who could have done such a terrible thing to her? These were the questions that lingered in the minds of the investigators. It was difficult to imagine the pain and suffering the young woman had endured before her tragic end. Her body was then sent for an autopsy to determine the cause of her death that same day on September 3, 1978. The mystery of the woman deepened as the autopsy report revealed that her cause of death was a severe head trauma. The examiners found no evidence of physical assault or sexual abuse, but they did find multiple abrasions on her face, arms, and back. Despite their thorough examination, they were unable to determine the exact circumstances that led to her untimely demise. The only clue they had was her age, which they estimated to be between 20 to 25 years old. The investigators were determined to bring justice to the unidentified victim found at the illegal landfill in Rankin County. The next day, on September 4, 1978, they scoured the area and started with knocking on doors and asking locals if they could recall any suspicious activity or out-of-the-ordinary occurrences during the time frame when the victim's body was found. But no one seemed to know anything about who this woman could be. So the investigators gave her a name, Mississippi Jane Doe. They continued to follow leads across the United States and Canada in hopes of uncovering her identity and pursue the case. But every avenue they explored hit a dead end. The case ultimately became cold and faded into obscurity, leaving behind unanswered questions and a sense of injustice for the victim. It would remain like this for over 4 decades. Finally, a glimmer of hope shone through in April 2021. The case was entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NAMUS, for help in the hope that someone, somewhere might recognize her and bring her identity into light. The case, known only as UP 79780, had stumped investigators for over 4 decades with no known missing person reports matching the victim's description. However, even with the help of advanced technology and the resources of the NAMUS system, the woman's identity remained a mystery. It seemed like the case of the unidentified Jane Doe was doomed to be forever unsolved. But fate intervened when officials from Ohio contacted Rankin County Coroner David Ruth and his deputy Heather Smith about a strikingly similar case in their state which had been solved using genetic genealogy. Suddenly, the Mississippi officials found themselves reinvigorated and determined to finally get a step closer towards her identity. They filed a petition with the courts to exhume the victim's body, and after careful consideration of the evidence, Judge Dewey Arthur granted their request. The long-dormant case was about to be reignited, and the search for answers was just getting started. In April 2022, officials embarked on the mission to uncover the truth behind this decades-old mystery. With determination and a keen eye for detail, they carefully exhumed the body of the homicide who had been buried for over 40 years. Coroner David Ruth and his team collected and prepared the forensic evidence with meticulous care, knowing that it could hold the key to finally identifying her. Their mission was clear: to extract the DNA necessary to unravel the secrets of the past. In the heart of Mississippi, there was a philanthropist named Carla Davis who was committed to help solve the state's unsolved cases. With a passion for justice and a generous heart, Carlo stepped up to fund the exhumation of the unidentified woman and promised to continue funding the casework necessary to identify her. She knew that finding the woman's identity was the key to solving the case and bringing closure to the woman's family. Her commitment to justice and compassion for the victim and her family serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are still people out there fighting for what's right. Despite their best efforts, the first 2 attempts at DNA testing failed to provide any breakthrough in identifying the woman. However, Carla Davis and the tenacious Rankin County investigators refused to give up hope. They decided to turn to a cutting-edge laboratory with an impressive track record of solving complex cases, Othram. This forensic laboratory had already helped crack more than a dozen challenging cases in Mississippi, and they were up for the challenge of unlocking the secrets hidden within the forensic evidence of this case. With a renewed sense of hope, they embarked on a 3rd attempt determined to bring her identity forward. In a scientific breakthrough that breathed new life into the decades-old case, Othram Laboratories received a small vial of forensic evidence from the 1978 James Doe. Despite previous attempts at DNA extraction ending in failure, the Othram lab team were determined to crack the case wide open. And finally, they were able to produce a DNA extract that could potentially lead to solving the case. With the advanced technology of forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram scientists delved into the DNA of the unidentified female homicide victim. The genetic code contained within her bones was like a puzzle waiting to be solved, and the team at Othram worked tirelessly to put the pieces together. Using their state-of-the-art equipment and expertise, they were able to unravel the mystery of her genetics and create a comprehensive genealogical profile. After the comprehensive genealogical profile was produced, Othram's chief genetic genealogist, Carla Davis, took the lead in searching for potential relatives of Mississippi Jane Doe, a Mississippi native dedicated to solving the state's unsolved cases. Carla was determined to bring closure to this decades-old mystery. She combed through public records, social media, and other sources to identify potential family members. After extensive research, Carla discovered a potential close relative of the victim. She was possibly the daughter of Mississippi Jane Doe. Additional DNA testing was conducted, and the results confirmed the investigative leads delivered by Othram. The mystery of the 1978 Jane Doe was finally solved, and her family could finally receive the answers they had been searching for. The identity of the long-unknown Jane Doe was finally revealed on February 12, 2023. The woman was no longer a nameless victim. She was Tanya Lee Wills Mullins, and she had been 22 when her life ended in such a tragic manner. Tanya, born on May 12, 1956 in Potter, Texas, was a child with a heart full of love and compassion. Her mother, Carrie Coffey, instilled in her daughter the values of kindness and empathy, which Tanya carried with her throughout her life. As a young girl, Tanya would often sing to soothe the souls of those around her, her angelic voice bringing comfort to all who heard it. These qualities of warmth and tenderness made Tanya a beloved figure among family and friends, and they remain an inspiration to all who knew her. When Tanya was 16 years old in the early 70s, she met Jim Mullen, who was a student at River Road Independent School. Tanya and Jim were just 2 young souls still in the prime of their youth when fate brought them together. They met in a small town of Texas where life was slow and easy, but love had a way of making things exciting. From the moment they laid eyes on each other, they knew that they were meant to be together. Tanya had always been a shy girl, but Jim brought out the best in her. His charming smile and easygoing personality made her feel like she was the most important person in the world. And for Jim, Tanya was the missing piece of his puzzle. He had never felt such a strong connection with anyone before, and he knew that he had to have her in his life. But their love was not without its challenges. Jim's family was not fond of Tanya, and they made their disapproval known from the very beginning. They saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their close-knit community. But Jim was not one to be swayed by others' opinions. He was determined to be with Tanya no matter what. Despite objections from their parents, the 2 lovers stood firm in their decision and exchanged their vows, determined to build a life together. Tanya, the beautiful bride, was a force to be reckoned with, standing up for what she believed in and always putting the needs of others before her own. Her strength and determination were evident in every aspect of her life, and her love for her family knew no bounds. And so the young couple embarked on a journey of love and commitment after being wed in 1973, a journey that would define them for years to come. A year into their marriage, Tanya gave birth to their first daughter Tammy in 1974, and 3 years later in 1977, they had another whom they named Crystal. In 1978, Tanya moved to Mississippi with her husband, Jim Mullins, and their 2 toddlers. Sadly, Tanya went missing after some months and was never seen again, leaving her family and friends to wonder what had happened to her for over 4 decades. But now, thanks to the dedication of forensic experts and the funding provided by philanthropist Carla Davis, Tanya's story can finally be told. Tammy Mullins, who is now 49 years old, reveals the story of her family's disappearance. Tammy's father had left to find a home for the family in Texas, but when he returned, he found his wife and 2 young daughters missing. He had no idea where they were. He made all the possible efforts to find his wife and his daughters, but it was all in vain. It was 3 months later that Tammy's grandmother received a mysterious phone call where she was told that if she wanted her granddaughters back, then she should come to DFW Airport. Before she could understand anything or could ask about Tanya, the call ended. Jim and his mother hurriedly went to the airport, which led to a tearful reunion between the girls and their father at the DFW airport. However, the joy was short-lived as their father was informed that their mother Tanya would be in touch soon. But that never happened. The family was left in the dark, wondering what had happened to Tanya. Until now, that is, since the power of forensic science has helped Tammy and her family finally have the answers they've been seeking for over 40 years. Tammy Mullins shared that after her mother's disappearance, their family received conflicting stories about where she had gone. Some said that she had left for Mexico with a man, while others claimed that she was in Florida. Despite the uncertainty surrounding her whereabouts, Tammy and her sister remember their mother as someone who loved and adored them. Tanya had a special talent for dressing them up like little dolls. Tammy and Crystal spoke with unwavering admiration for their father, who always answered their questions with honesty and never spoke ill of their mother. They knew that he loved her until the very end and was just as heartbroken as they were. After they were informed of what had happened to her, the sisters decided to honor her memory by traveling to Mississippi to attend a memorial service on March 14, 2023. It was a journey filled with mixed emotions, but they knew it was important to be there for each other and to pay tribute to the woman who had loved them so deeply. Tammy spoke with a resolute voice as she shared her thoughts on the recent turn of events in her mother's case. She expressed that the discovery of her mother's murder had opened a new chapter in their lives, one that they never expected to face. The trauma of their mother's sudden departure has now been replaced with the urgent need to find the person responsible for her death. Tammy believes that divine justice will prevail and that the perpetrator will ultimately face the consequences of their actions. Despite the long passage of time, there is still hope of finding a suspect. As the coroner, David Ruth, has suggested that it is not impossible. The Mullins sisters are determined to seek closure and find justice for their beloved mother, no matter how long it takes. The unnatural death of Tanya not only left her family, but also the community of Mississippi with unanswered questions. But thanks to the tireless effort of the local sheriff's department, Tanya Mullins was finally identified. Coroner David Ruth expressed his satisfaction with the outcome, saying that revealing the identity of the victim was the most rewarding thing to him. And the best part was that the investigation didn't cost taxpayers a single penny. Thanks to the generosity of Carla Davis, who funded the exhumation and forensic testing necessary to solve the case. It's heartening to know that there are still good people out there willing to help resolve these cold cases and bring justice to families like the Mullins. While the missing persons investigation is now closed, the murder investigation is still ongoing as the killer behind this heinous act is yet to be caught. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. This case brings us to Rockdale, a village in Illinois located just over 40 miles west of Chicago. May 13, 1997 began like any other day in Rockdale. The sun bore down on a construction site where heavy machinery and workers were clearing debris from a dusty landfill. Amid the chaos and noise, Kevin P. McGowan, an archaeologist from the esteemed University of Illinois, meticulously sifted through layers of refuse and debris, hoping to uncover artifacts or historical remnants. Unbeknownst to him, he was on the brink of discovering something profoundly shocking and disturbing. As his eyes sifted through the layers of debris, his trained eyes noticed something peculiar. There, buried beneath the dusty landfill in Rockdale, Illinois, was a bone unlike any other in the pile. He felt a jolt of excitement as he carefully extracted it from the debris. His heart raced with anticipation. It was covered in dirt and grime, evidence of its long-forgotten existence. With a gentle hand, he wiped it clean, revealing its true shape and size. The bone seemed to tell a story of its own, whispering secrets of a time long past. But as he examined the bone more closely, he realized with growing horror that it was a human's bone. The archaeologist, along with his assistant, had stumbled upon the remains of a human body. According to the police, the remains were found at about 10:15 a.m. on September 3, 1978, several 100 yards northeast of Mound Road in Moan Avenue on the outskirts of Rockdale. As his discovery sent shock waves through the dusty landfill in Rockdale, he quickly called the sheriff's office and the authorities were quick to respond. What started as a routine archaeological research in an unincorporated Joliet Township turned into a full-blown investigation when a human bone was discovered on the premises. The police arriving at the scene in a flurry of activity cordoned off the area to begin their investigation. It was apparent to investigators that they were dealing with a homicide case. It seemed that whoever buried the body underground was trying to conceal it from the world. The remains had been unceremoniously buried, hinting at a cruel and inhumane act. The investigators could tell that the victim had been murdered because only one bone was discovered, which means that the person would have been cut into pieces and the other body parts would have been scattered at different places, adding a sense of urgency to their work. They were determined to uncover the truth behind this heinous crime, and the hunt for answers had begun. The stakes were high, and the weight of responsibility on their shoulders was immense, but they were ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. The discovery sent shock waves through the community, prompting law enforcement officials to launch a thorough investigation. Who was the deceased, and how did the person end up buried in the landfill? These were the questions on everyone's mind. The investigation was far from easy. It would take years of tireless work, countless interviews, and the latest scientific breakthroughs to solve the mystery. The officers stood around the partial remains of the body, their eyes locked onto the grisly sight mixed with curiosity and concern. It was clear that something had disturbed the rest of the body, and the officers couldn't help but wonder where the other body parts were. The scene was quickly secured, and detectives were called to investigate further. With their experience and expertise, they hoped to uncover any additional skeletal remains that might provide vital clues to solving this macabre crime. Amidst the rubble and debris, the investigators painstakingly combed through the construction landfill, the layers of brick, stone, and wood. As they dug deeper, what they discovered became more gruesome and chilling. Skeletal remains, broken and fragmented, emerged from the debris. The source of this debris was traced back to the Rust Craft Building, a massive 3-story structure with a full basement that once dominated the Joliet skyline. The investigators knew that they had their work cut out for them as they delved deeper into this bone-chilling discovery. In the world of forensic investigation, pathologists are the skilled professionals who meticulously examine the human body and its tissues to unravel the secrets of death. However, in the case of the unknown remains, authorities take a slightly different approach. Instead of a traditional pathologist examination, the remains undergo an anthropological examination. This fascinating field involves the study of human skeletal remains to determine age, gender, ancestry, and other characteristics that can help piece together the identity of the deceased with only partial skeletal remains recovered. It was a daunting task to piece together the clues and unravel the secrets. They managed to glean some fascinating insights into the life of these mysterious bone fragments, revealing a glimpse of the past and perhaps even unlocking some secrets of the person's untimely demise. From just fragments of bones, pathologists were able to put together some fascinating details about the unknown person on October 14, 1997. The bones were of a woman. She was estimated to be in her youth, somewhere between the ages of 15 to 24 years old, with her entire life ahead of her. She stood between 5 and 5 foot 10 inches tall. Despite her incomplete remains, these details allowed them to imagine what this young woman might have been like in life and spark a sense of curiosity about her untold story. Without any identity to be followed, the person whose bones were found was given the name Rockdale's Jane Doe. Forensic pathologists were unable to determine any other distinguishing features about her appearance. Was she fair-skinned or olive-toned? Did she have auburn hair or jet black locks? The answers to these questions, like the woman herself, were buried in the ground and lost to time. Yet despite the lack of information, the pathologists remained undaunted in their quest for answers, knowing that even the smallest detail could make all the difference in solving this perplexing case. As the investigators looked towards the timeline of events, a poignant realization dawned upon them. The unknown woman had likely lived and died in the years leading up to the demolition of the Rustcraft building in 1986. What was her life like during those tumultuous years, and what led to her untimely demise? The world around her was changing rapidly with new technologies, cultural shifts, and political upheavals reshaping the landscape. Was she a witness to these changes, or was she struggling to survive amidst the chaos? As the investigators pondered these questions, they couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sadness for the woman whose life had ended in such a tragic and mysterious manner. When they dug deeper into the history of the mysterious building, in whose rubble the remains were found, they uncovered a treasure trove of information that left them intrigued. It turns out that this ancient structure had been used by numerous companies since its inception in 1907. It was once a majestic factory, a towering structure, which was struck by disaster in 1992. The flames of a ferocious fire raged through the building for 2 long days, devouring everything in its path. The flames reached high into the sky, looking at the clouds like a vengeful beast, taunting the brave firefighters who fought bravely to contain the inferno. But their efforts were in vain, and the once magnificent factory was reduced to a mere shadow of its former self, a solemn reminder of the destructive power of fire. Before its demise, the factory had become something of a heaven for the local homeless population. The building was far from safe, but for those who had nowhere else to go, it provided shelter from the elements. However, it was also known to be a hotbed of criminal activity, with nefarious characters lurking in the shadows. As the smoke cleared and the ashes settled, the city knew they had to act fast. The once towering factory had become a ticking time bomb, posing a threat to all who ventured near. With heavy hearts, the decision was made to demolish the building, but the question remained what to do with the rubble. A stroke of genius provided a solution: that the debris should be carefully cleared, leaving behind the barren wasteland where the factory once stood. However, the remnants of the wreckage were not discarded, but rather repurposed. The basement of the factory was filled with the remains of the building, providing a solid foundation for what would come next. When they investigated further, they learned that in 1995, a curious decision was made to uproot the building's remains and relocate them to a new location in Rockdale where the bone fragments were found. Their theory that the woman was killed elsewhere and then buried in the spot was confirmed when the pathologist informed them that the body of the unknown woman had been disturbed not once, but twice after death, suggesting that someone had been present at the original factory location. The mystery surrounding the woman's demise only deepened with this disturbing revelation. In 2009, hope emerged to win the Will County coroner, Patrick K. O'Neill, formed a dedicated team to bring justice to the forgotten victim. The cold case unit embarked on an arduous journey, meticulously piecing together every detail of the case. Over the years, forensic anthropology studies were conducted. DNA was extracted and entered into the vast National Missing and Unidentified Persons Database, NAMUS, and the profile was tirelessly searched in CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. The team even turned to the latest in FBI technology, commissioning a specialized unit to create a facial reconstruction of the unknown woman. Yet each lead was pursued and ultimately eliminated, leaving the team with more questions than answers. On June 8, 2022, the Will County Coroner's Office teamed up with Othram, a forensic DNA sequencing laboratory, to solve the puzzling cold case of Rockdale's Jane Doe. Armed with cutting-edge technology and a determination to solve this long-standing riddle, the team set out on their quest, but it wouldn't be easy. Previous attempts at DNA testing had failed, leaving little hope for a breakthrough. However, the Will County Coroner's Office was undeterred and even contributed funding to support the new round of testing. With advanced forensic DNA testing at their disposal, the team was determined to crack the case once and for all. And with the help of a crowdfund campaign that raised additional funds and support from the community, the team was finally able to move forward with their investigation. The stakes were high and the pressure was on, but the team was ready to do whatever it took to bring closure to this long-standing mystery. Kristen Middleman, the Chief Development Officer at Othram, knew the importance of identifying the perpetrators or victims of a crime. And that's exactly what Othram was able to do in this case. The experts at Othram were determined to crack the case, and they knew that advanced DNA testing was the key to unlocking the mystery of the unknown woman's identity. Through forensic-grade genome sequencing technology, they were able to extract key genetic information from the skeletal remains, enabling them to construct a comprehensive genealogical profile. But that was just the beginning. With dogged determination, the Othrams and House genetic genealogy team then took over, tirelessly researching the family tree to create an investigative lead for law enforcement. Their dedication paid off, and the breakthrough they were hoping for finally emerged. The lab was able to uncover a match of possible relatives, providing the veteran investigators with a crucial lead. It was the moment they had been waiting for, the break in the case that could finally bring some closure to this unsolvable mystery. The investigation was far from over, but this breakthrough gave them renewed hope. Once the leads were returned to law enforcement, cold case investigators interviewed several people in Illinois, Texas, and California. After years of painstaking investigation, the answers finally came to them. Othram's advanced DNA testing had led them to a man in California named Chris O'Brien, who they believed could be the key to unlocking the mystery of the unidentified woman. Cold case investigators from the coroner's office quickly made their way to his house and interviewed him, and discovered that he had a sister who he had not seen since 1984. Could this missing sister be the unidentified woman they had been searching for all these years? To answer this question, they collected DNA from Chris O'Brien and sent it to the Othram labs for further testing. And the subsequent kin SNP testing confirmed that Chris and the identified woman were half-siblings. His long-lost sister had finally been found thanks to the tireless efforts of law enforcement and the cutting-edge technology of Othram. On March 3, 2023, after 26 years of being a nameless victim in a cold case, the woman who had been found in the ruins of an Illinois factory in 1997 finally had a name: Marie R. O'Brien. Born in the charming town of Aurora on July 16, 1966, Marie was a daughter, sister, and friend to those who knew her. Her elder brother, Chris O'Brien, was someone she looked up to and loved dearly. And though her life was tragically cut short, Marie's memory will now live on with dignity and warmth as her loved ones can finally lay her to rest with a sense of closure. Marie R. O'Brien was a bright and cheerful student at Golden Rule Charter School, where her outgoing nature and friendly demeanor earned her many friends. Her trusting nature, however, often raised concern among those who cared about her. Her elder brother, Chris O'Brien, described her by saying that she often placed her trust in random strangers too easily, a trait that may have ultimately led to her tragic fate. Despite her brother's efforts to contact her after 1984, Marie disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a void in the lives of those who knew her. Marie R. O'Brien may have been a woman of few words, but her actions spoke volumes. Her community in Aurora knew her as a true gem, a kind-hearted soul who always put others first. From a young age, Marie's talents were evident to all. She was a creative force, and her passion for art was undeniable. Her paintings were breathtaking and were cherished by all who received them. But Marie's generosity extended far beyond her artistic talents. She was always willing to lend a helping hand, and her selfless nature was an inspiration to all those around her. It's no wonder that she was so well loved by her friends and family, who couldn't get enough of her infectious warmth and charming personality. Though her time was tragically cut short, Marie's legacy lives on through the lives she touched with her kindness and creativity. But the case is not yet solved. There are questions that still linger in the minds of Marie's loved ones. Who took her away from them? As they wait for justice to be served, They hold on to hope that the perpetrator will be caught and closure will finally be within reach. For Christ, Marie's older brother, the wait has been agonizing. Every day, he wonders who could have done this to his beloved sister and why, but he remains determined to see the case through to its end, to bring peace to Maria's memory and justice to her name. The search for answers continues, and the family's faith in the investigative team never wavers. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. June 15th, 1986 dawned as a tranquil and seemingly serene Sunday morning in Buckingham Township, located in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. With the weekend winding down, many residents enjoyed a leisurely morning, either catching up on sleep after Saturday night or pursuing their hobbies for relaxation. Among them, a fisherman from Buckingham Township chose to indulge in his passion by the Delaware River, preparing for a peaceful day of fishing. Equipped with his gear, he ventured out from home, anticipating a day of angling and hoping for a successful catch. Little did he know, what awaited him would be beyond anything he could have imagined. Instead of fish, he was going to catch something else entirely on the banks of the river. He arrived at the river and was walking along the bank near the Mooresville boat ramp, looking for a good spot to establish himself when he noticed something white sticking out of the shrubbery at the side of the riverbank. Curious, he went closer to see what it was and recoiled in shock when he realized it was a human skull. He looked around to see if there were any more bones or remains scattered near the skull, but could find nothing. Knowing he had to do something, he initially thought of calling the police. But since he did not know how long it would take them to get there, he took matters into his own hands and picked up the skull and took it to the Buckingham Township Police Department, so they could investigate the matter. When the Buckingham Township Police Department received the skull, they were at a loss as how to investigate this matter. Due to the condition of the skull and the fact that no other remains were found other than the skull, there was little investigators could do to identify the unknown person or even attempt to describe any physical characteristics the person may have had. From examining the skull, they were able to determine that it belonged to someone white, but they cannot determine the sex or the age of the victim, except that the victim had been less than 70 years old. Other than this, they had no other information about who this victim could have been, which made the investigation almost impossible to conduct as there was so little to work with. They tried to look through missing person cases at the time to see if any of them matched the scant information they had, but there was no way to determine if the skull belonged to any of the people they looked at. Eventually, with so little to work with, the investigation began to grow cold. Since only a skull was found with no other remains, there was no burial held, and the skull was stored away as evidence as it was the only clue available to investigators at a time. They hoped that in the years to come with advances in science, the skull would be of use in the future. With no other leads to follow, the victim was classified as unknown, and the case went cold. In October 2019, 33 years after the initial discovery of the skull near the Delaware River, during the probe of a homicide investigation, Bucks County detectives took possession of the skull, but eventually relinquished it to the Bucks County Coroner's Office. Later that year, the Coroner's Office entered the skull into the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NAMUS database, under the ID UP 62362. They hoped that perhaps it would help jog the memory of someone who had been searching for their missing loved one all of these years. But unfortunately, no one came forward as the details surrounding the victim were still not very useful in helping someone identify them. All that was known now, even with the advancements in science since the initial discovery, was that the skull belonged to a man who had been under 70 years old and was white. Even though this information was put into NAMUS, eventually, the case went dormant again for another 3 years. Then in September of 2022, 36 years after the initial discovery, Bucks County detectives went and retrieved the skull from the Bucks County Coroner's Office. Over the past few years, a number of cold cases from around the country had been solved through a revolutionary new DNA testing method called genetic genealogy. It used DNA testing and family trees to identify possible relatives to DNA profiles that had been unidentifiable for years. Bucks County detectives were hopeful that this amazing new technology would be useful in providing them with a breakthrough in this John Doe that they had been chasing for over 3.5 decades. They had almost given up hope of ever solving this case due to how little information they had. But finally, after 36 years, they believed genetic genealogy might actually give them the chance. They sent the skull off to Othram, an organization based in Texas that specializes in forensic genealogy testing. Since forensic testing is an expensive process, the funds needed for testing the skull were contributed by AudioChunk, a podcasting platform that hosts a number of true crime podcasts. Once the funds were secured through AudioChunk's help and generosity, the forensic investigators at Othram got down to work. First, they developed a viable DNA extract from the skull and then used a forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a comprehensive DNA profile. Their in-house genealogy team then tested this profile against other profiles within their system to find if there were any matches within their databases that could lead them to relatives of the John Doe who were still alive in 2022. After a few short weeks of waiting for results, they were led to a 49-year-old woman residing in Florida, whose DNA partially matched the profile they had developed from the skull. From the percentage of the match, Othram scientists believed that this woman could possibly be the daughter of John Doe, who had remained unidentified all these years. They provided these leads to the Bucks County detectives, who went to interview the woman on January 4, 2023 to see if her father had been missing for over 3 decades. The woman whose name was not released to the public revealed to the detectives that her father had in fact gone missing when she was only 11 years old. A subsequent test comparing the woman's full DNA results with the profile Othram had developed confirmed a parent-child relationship between their individual samples. Detectives had finally made a breakthrough in identifying the John Doe, and they learned that his name had been Richard Thomas Alt. Richard Thomas Alt was born in 1954 in the city of Trenton in the state of New Jersey. While not much is known about his early life, he spent all of it within Trenton itself, where both his parents doted on him dearly. He remained close to his parents as he grew into an adult, and since they lived in the same city, he would often spend time with them. Sometimes in his late 20s, he met a young secretary named Lori Sudam and was instantly smitten by her. The two of them quickly got into a relationship and were still together at the time when Richard went missing. The last recorded time of Richard being seen alive was on Christmas of 1984, when he visited his parents in a spirit of festive cheer. They had a wonderful time together, and when he left, his parents had no idea that this was the last time they would see their beloved son. Over the next few days, they began to grow increasingly concerned as there was no form of contact from Richard, which was very unusual. They tried to call him, but got no response. And when they tried to call his girlfriend Lori to find out if she knew where he was, they could not get in touch with her as well. Finally, in January of 1985, they reported him missing to the police. A missing persons report was generated, and a description of Richard was sent out to the public. In it, he was listed as 510 and weighing 140 pounds. He was a Caucasian man with medium to long strawberry blonde hair and blue eyes. The description was put out to the public in hopes that someone who had seen Richard would come forward, but no one did. His girlfriend Lori, who no one could find as well, was also reported missing at the time. Sadly, 3 months later on April 20th, 1985, 2 men who were fishing from a boat in the marina on the Delaware River in Trenton found the body of Lori Sudman floating on the water. When they called the authorities, they were able to identify her using fingerprint analysis as her prints were in the system as she had been previously arrested for a drug charge. Her death was never solved and remains an unsolved homicide even today. But at that time, police suspected that foul play was involved in both her death and the disappearance of Richard. Richard's skull was only discovered over a year later, but took over 3 decades to be identified, and the events surrounding both his and Lori's death remains a mystery even today. Once Richard was identified in 2023, Bucks County authorities closed their investigation into his death and disappearance due to lack of evidence of any crime being committed in Bucks County. The investigation into his and Lori's death is now being carried out by the Mercer County Police Department, under whose jurisdiction it falls. They have asked that if anyone has any information that might be useful to the investigation, they should come forward. In a statement to the press, Bucks County District Attorney Matthew D. Weintraub, "I can't even imagine wondering and worrying about a lost family member for even a day, let alone for 37 years. That wait is now over for Mr. Alt's family. I'm just glad that we could give them some peace of mind with this identification and the eventual return of his remains to his family. He also specifically thanked Othram, acknowledging that the case could never have been solved without their technical expertise. He hopes the genetic genealogy and the expertise of institutions like Othram will continue to provide breakthroughs in cases like this that have seemed hopeless for so many years. On March 27, 1998, a Lolita resident and his son were on a boat sailing down the Eel River in search of driftwood. Something strange attracted their attention near Cockrebin Island as they were navigating through the river's bends and turns. They initially assumed it was just another piece of wood entangled in a nearby tree's branches. But as they got closer, they realized they were witnessing what appeared to be human remains. They were horrified at their discovery and rushed to inform the authorities at the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office. The people of Lolita were shocked and dismayed as a result of this tragic day, which would never be forgotten and would always be a part of this small town's history. On hearing the news, the sheriff's deputies wasted no time in responding. They hurried by jet boat to the Eel River, unaware at the time that this case was going to stick with them for a very long time. They finally arrived at the location where the locals had reported the discovery. Their greatest fears were realized. The body of a man was found there, only partially clothed and in a stage of advanced decomposition. The deputies could make out that he was a white adult male despite a state of decay. But other than that, they had no idea who he was or how he got into the river. The deputies were shocked at what they were seeing, and even the most seasoned were taken aback by the state the body was in. They removed the body from the water right away, meticulously going through the clothing, hoping that they would find some scrap of information that would have allowed them to identify the deceased. However, they were disappointed when they found that there was no form of identification and no personal possessions. Basically, nothing that could have assisted in identifying the victim. The body was taken from the scene and brought to coroner's office for additional investigation. Although the results of the autopsy were disheartening, they provided the police with a place to start. The autopsy found that the individual had been in the water for a month before his discovery. And according to the coroner's report, the cause of death was that he had drowned. They were also able to find out some basic information about the man, including the fact that he was a white male adult, 5 foot 10 inches tall, about 170 pounds, and likely 35 to 45 years old. However, when they checked the database, this description did not match any reported missing persons from Northern California. Taking this into account, they began an investigation to find this unknown man's identity, and he was given the name of the Humboldt County, John Doe. As they attempted to solve the riddle surrounding the man they had discovered in the river, detectives felt a sense of urgency. Before they could figure out what happened before his death, they understood they had to learn who he was. They were determined to learn who this individual had been, because they were positive that someone out there was missing a loved one. The investigators put in a lot of effort and made the man's description public, hoping that it would jog someone's recollection of filing a missing persons report and lead to new information in the case. Days became weeks, yet despite all of their efforts, they had no results. But they remained hopeful that a single clue could help them crack the case wide open, and in this hope pursued every possible lead to the best of their ability. When the California Department of Justice discovered one latent fingerprint on the body later in 1998, there was finally some hope for the police. The automated latent print system was then used to analyze this. The detectives hoped that this could be a break in the case that they needed. However, their hopes were again dashed when the results came back and there was no matches in the system. Despite the setback, the investigations collected the man's DNA profile, which they then submitted into a number of databases, including the National Unidentified Persons DNA Index and the California Missing Persons DNA Database. Again, they searched the databases looking for any indication of a match, but it turned up no results. As the years went by, the case remained open, as missing persons investigation cannot be closed. The DNA profile was routinely searched against profiles from both missing persons and other human remains in the combined index system COITUS, but no profile matches were ever made. Over time, even though the investigation remained open, the case went cold. For 25 long years, the case lay dormant with no new information or leads for the detectives to follow. In December 2022, The sheriff's office partnered with a forensic genealogy company called Othram, which is based in Texas. The partnership sought to identify the man through the application of innovative forensic DNA testing. A sample of the man's DNA was submitted to the lab, where the group of specialists started carefully and meticulously examining it. By utilizing forensic-grade genome sequencing, a cutting-edge method, they were able to create a comprehensive DNA profile of the man. After obtaining the profile, their genealogy team used forensic genetic genealogy to provide leads for investigations. This innovative approach combined DNA testing with traditional genealogical methods to create family profiles. By studying the genetic makeup of a DNA profile and comparing it within the many profiles already in the system, researchers can determine whether there are any biological relations of the profile they are testing for within the system and the percentage of the match. This was the method they used to identify the Humboldt County John Doe. After months of agonizing anticipation, the authorities finally heard back from Othram with the results of the testing in middle of February 2023. According to the lab's analysis, it was very likely that the Humboldt County John Doe was the relative of a woman named Cheryl, who was living in Missouri at the time. Othram believed that Cheryl was likely Humboldt County John Doe's sister. The detectives from the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office then reached out to Cheryl and learned that she did indeed have a brother who had been missing for many years named Jeffrey Todd Cedos. Cheryl was shocked to hear from detectives about her missing brother after all these years. When the detectives from the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office went out to Missouri to interview her, she told them that she had been searching for Jeffrey for many years and had almost given up hope on ever finding out what happened to him. Cheryl also told detectives that Jeffrey had been born in 1963 and would have been 35 when his body was found in 1998. However, she told them that the last contact she or anyone in the family had with him had been many years before that, as they had not seen or heard from him since the mid-1990s. She told them that he had stopped communicating with her and all the other members of their family for reasons that were unknown to all of them. She had tried reaching out to him, but had never gotten a response. This is why they had never filled out a missing persons report about Jeffrey, as she and all of her family had thought his absence from their lives was an intentional choice that he had made. One would think that this information from Cheryl, as well as the DNA testing from Othram, would have been all the evidence that the police required to close the case. But they were determined to leave no stone unturned and confirm his identity once and for all. To do so, they obtained the fingerprints of Jeffrey and compared these to a latent fingerprint they had been able to lift off the body they found in the Eel River all those many years ago. All their hard work had paid off as the fingerprints came back as a perfect match. Finally, after 24 years, they knew for sure that Humboldt County John Doe was actually Jeffrey Todd Cedos. Now that his identity has been confirmed, the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office is now working with his family members to make sure that his remains are returned to them so he can be buried along with his other deceased loved ones after decades of not knowing where her brother was or what had happened to him. She thanked the detectives for their dedication to her brother's case and making sure that it was resolved after all these years. The Humboldt County Sheriff's Office thanked the California Department of Justice DNA Lab and Othram for their outstanding work and assistance in solving this case and providing the Cedos family some closure for their missing loved one. The Sheriff's Office still wants to know what happened to Jeffrey in his final days, as they have urged anyone with information about his last known activities or whereabouts prior to his death to come forward and report it. And this is where we end it, folks. We hope you enjoy the time with us today and learning about how genetic genealogy finally helped uncover the identities of these second John Does in 2023. We hope with these advancements in technology, more and more of these cases that have been dormant for years will be solved in the near future. In 1991, Patricia Moreno, known as Trisha to her loved ones, was a 17-year-old residing with her foster family in Malden, Massachusetts. By June of that year, she had been living in their Henry Street apartment for a little over 2 months, alongside her foster mother and 2 foster sisters. In the early hours of June 20th, police received a distressing call from Patricia's foster mother. Responding swiftly, they arrived at the apartment building and ascended to the family's 3rd-floor unit. There, they discovered Patricia on the fire escape, suffering from a gunshot wound to the head. She was found alone face down on the 3rd-floor fire escape landing, still breathing, but seriously injured in the middle of the night. Though she was rushed to the Massachusetts General Hospital immediately, she died approximately 12 hours later. When police spoke with the family, they determined that Patricia's foster mother, her 2 teenage daughters, and Rodney Daniels, the boyfriend of one of the daughters, were all home when the murder occurred. They all said they heard 2 gunshots, but none of them knew who pulled the trigger. Daniels, who was 18 at the time, stayed at the apartment occasionally. When speaking to the police, he claimed he was asleep in the living room when he heard the gunshots and ran out to the fire escape where he found Patricia. During their investigation, police determined the crime scene had found no signs of forced entry and no weapons or shell casings. They did, however, discover that Daniels owned multiple hands. They also found out that in the months leading up to Patricia's murder, she and Daniels had several unpleasant interactions, which included Daniels threatening her. Still, no arrests were made. Years passed without Patricia's family and friends receiving any closure. Then, in 2019, Middlesex County District Attorney Marion Ryan created a new cold case unit. In 2020, the unit was assigned to Patricia's case. Investigators reconstructed the scene at the apartment where they determined that based on Patricia's location, the shot had been fired from the doorway to the apartment. They started re-interviewing witnesses too, which included a resident of the building who lived above the family, but had previously been out of the country. According to the witness, they'd been woken up by a loud noise and looked to the fire escape, where they saw a man matching Daniels' appearance. With that information, the police obtained a warrant for Daniels and arrested him without incident on September 27, 2021. Daniels, now 48, living in Georgia, was indicted and arraigned on first-degree charges for the murder of Patricia Moreno. That same month, Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan and Chief Calvin Moelis of the Malden Police Department announced that Patricia's killer had been identified and charged. In a joint statement, they said, "We know that whenever we make these kind of announcements, it is bittersweet. Because on the one hand, we are finally able to hold someone accountable. On the other hand, as was the case yesterday in talking to Trisha's loved ones, it certainly brings back a well of memories, takes people back to probably what was one of the worst incidents in their lives." Daniels' arrest was the first made by the Middlesex DA's cold case unit. The police emphasized that the arrest was not due to new forensic technology like so many other cases, but due to the department's traditional police work and persistence. Malden Chief Kevin Moelis spoke about the success of the cold case arrest and had warnings for those who assumed they've gotten away with the crime. In the summer of 1977, Ileana, 16, and Eric Sean Goldstrin, 17, were enjoying their summer break as a couple before they returned to school at North Eugene High School in Eugene, Oregon. On Monday, June 9th, they were headed to the Broken Bowl picnic grounds in the Fall Creek area of the Lane County, where they planned to spend the afternoon fishing and picnicking. But when neither teen returned home, their parents began to worry. They then called the Lane County Sheriff's Office, which sent an officer out to check on them. The officer discovered Liana's body first, near the picnic area. She had been sexually assaulted and shot to death. They then found Eric's body, which was in a nearby bush. He too had been shot to death. Though police gathered fingerprints and DNA from the scene, they found no matches. But that didn't stop them from continuing their investigation into the double murder. Over the years, investigators conducted many interviews and polygraph tests. They analyzed and reanalyzed the evidence and tested different firearms and bullets to try and find a match. Still, they could never establish a solid lead on who killed Ileana and Eric. 43 years later, in June of 2020, the case was cracked wide open. The suspect's DNA from the crime scene was resubmitted and analyzed using new genealogical technologies, and they had an ID, Ronald Albert Troy. At the time of the murders, Troy was 23 years old and a resident of Lane County, Oregon. He had moved from the area 3 years after the murders and had been living in Arizona since 2008. Little is known about Troy, and he seems to have kept a low profile. In February of 2021, investigators were prepared to present their findings to a grand jury before arresting and charging Troy, but they never got the chance. He took his own life after an unrelated domestic violence incident in Arizona. Ileana and Eric are remembered fondly. In their high school yearbook, They're described as two good-natured and fun-loving members of the student body and outgoing personalities who are better than average students. Though their killer couldn't be brought to justice, hopefully, his identification provided some closure for their families. On July 28, 1988, Judy was found in the basement of her former Fargo building on D Street in Boston, Massachusetts. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled by her killer, who wouldn't be identified for 33 years. The journey to Judy's murder began in 1990. Richard Vega, who also went by Carl Vega, Ricardo Vega, and Ricardo Mazzarino, had been convicted in 1990 of 3 counts of rape and sentenced to 20 years in prison. As part of his conviction, Vega was required to submit a DNA sample to the FBI's Combined DNA Indexing System, also known as CODIS. But since there were limited DNA testing capabilities during that time, he couldn't be connected to Judy's murder just yet. In 2008, Vega was set to be released from prison. But after a petition from the Suffolk County prosecutors, a jury found him too sexually dangerous to live in the public, and he was civilly committed where he remains today. A few years later, in 2011, Suffolk County prosecutors and Boston Police Department's homicide unit detectives identified Vega as a suspect in Judy's murder after CODIS matched his DNA profile to the DNA found at the crime scene. They still couldn't charge Vega. The DNA match wasn't sufficient enough evidence, and they couldn't prove his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Then District Attorney Rachel Rollins' project for unsolved Suffolk homicides, PUSH, stepped in. They re-examined the case and collected enough additional evidence that they were able to present to a grand jury and charge Vega with Judy's murder on August 30th, 2021. Miss Chamberlain's life mattered, and there will be a lifetime of accountability for her brutal murder and callous disposal. Judy's family and loved ones never stopped loving her, and we never stopped searching for answers. It has been a long road, and we are so grateful for the excellent police and investigative work that got us to this moment. In an interview, Judy's sister said she was shocked when she heard news of the arrest. "I was floored. It's like it just took back a lot of old memories." Judy's brother, John Olson, said he had actually given up hope on the case. With so many cold cases being solved this year, let it be a warning to those who have perpetuated crimes. Your time is up, and don't think you've gotten away with it. In the 1990s, Angel Brown harbored aspirations of becoming a boxer, dedicating countless hours to training and testing her skills in the ring. However, following a series of defeats, she decided to retire from boxing and transition to exotic dancing instead. One fateful night at the Queen of Hearts Club in Ashtabula, Ohio, her fortunes took a turn when she met Daniel Posey, who would later become her husband. Yet, their burgeoning relationship faced a significant obstacle. Daniel was a married father of 3, and he was a good father too, according to his ex-wife, Lisa Luke, but their marriage fell apart after one of their children was diagnosed with leukemia. Then Lisa had caught Daniel having an affair. Daniel had visited Lisa and their sick child at the hospital, and he was dressed suspiciously well. When Daniel left, Lisa trailed behind him and followed him to the Queen of Hearts Club, where Brown was a dancer. Daniel and Lisa divorced in 1996, and he left with Angel Brown to Las Vegas, where they lived for 3 years. In 2003, they went back to Ohio and got married, where he took her last name as a sign of devotion, as Brown requested. Daniel and Brown had their first son in 2004, and Brown became a stay-at-home mother, trading in nights at the strip club for PDA meetings. Then in 2011, a freak accident turned everyone's world upside down. Daniel had been driving down State Route 193 when a runaway horse from a nearby Amish community ran into the road and hit his truck. Daniel was killed instantly, as was another driver who'd swerved trying to avoid the collision. At the time of his death, Daniel was over $30,000 behind in child support payments to Lisa. And when she'd called to ask him about the money, he'd hand the phone to Brown, who'd tell her she wasn't getting a cent. Daniel's life insurance policy totaled $255,000. After his death, Lisa tried to receive what she was owed in child support, and while doing so, found out that Brown had only listed one of her and Daniel's kids as his next of kin, which would have provided Brown with a larger piece of the pie. Soon after, Brown filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the owner of the horse involved in the accident. As a result of the settlement, Daniel's estate would receive $200,000. Brown assumed she would be the sole recipient of the proceeds until she found out that she would have to split the money with Daniel's 3 children from his first marriage, and Brown didn't like that. So that same day, she reached out to an old friend, James Holly, for a favor. James knew Brown from her days as a stripper and aspiring boxer. He was not only a customer at the strip club, but also had been her boxing trainer. They'd reconnected after he was released from prison, where he was serving time for conspiracy to commit arson at a fireworks factory. Brown told James that she was having trouble sorting out her late husband's estate with his ex-wife and that she needed Lisa gone. She paid him a down payment of $4,000, which he accepted, and then used to pay his bills before gambling the rest away at a casino in Pennsylvania. The next day, Brown texted James and asked if the murder had happened yet. He told her it would be done that night, but instead, he made his way to the police and reported her to the Ashtabula County Police Sheriff, William Johnson. James told Sheriff Johnson that, of course, he never intended to carry out the murder-for-hire plot, but he worried that Brown would try to hire another hitman instead. While the police were interviewing James, Brown sent him another text calling up the murder. She told him to keep a $1,000 of the down payment for his troubles. As per police instructions, James called Brown back and told her he'd already spent the money and asked if she still wanted the murder done. "Go ahead and do it," Brown responded. Police then outfitted James with a hidden camera and sent him to Brown's house to discuss the deal. They met on her front porch, where she relayed her worries about being caught. She even patted him down looking for a wire. James later contacted Brown and told her he'd murdered Lisa, and when he asked what she wanted done with the body, Brown told him to make it disappear. Brown was arrested soon after. According to Detective Sean Ward, who transported Brown to the police station after her arrest, Brown repeatedly stated, "You don't understand why I did it. She was going to take everything from me." Brown told police that she never gave James any money to kill Lisa, and that she was only joking when she told James that she wanted Lisa dead. But police found evidence on Brown while they were booking her, including James' business card, a $2,000 money wrapper, and receipts from the bank totaling large sums. During the trial, Brown pleaded not guilty and claimed that the whole incident was misinterpreted by investigators and that the entire scenario was based on a $150 marijuana deal. But the police had recordings, including a phone call between Brown and James, where she told him that she wanted Lisa's body to disappear, but didn't want to be implicated in her death. Brown asked Judge Ronald Patel for lenience since a guilty verdict would result in her and Daniel's 9-year-old son losing both of their parents. Her lawyer urged that she received a probation sentence instead, but Judge Patel didn't budge, telling her, "You should have thought of your child when this whole preposterous event started. Your child was not your #1 consideration." In August of 2013, after just 2 short hours of jury deliberation, Brown was found guilty on 2 counts of conspiracy to commit aggravated murder and was sentenced to 9 years in prison. The events took a huge toll on Lisa and her children. After learning about the murder-for-hire plot, Lisa obtained a permit for a handgun for self-protection and called the police multiple times when she feared people were lurking outside her home. Lisa said, "From the day the detectives showed up at my door and told me that a murder was planned upon me, my life has been terrible. I don't feel safe going anywhere." As it turns out, even prison couldn't keep Brown out of trouble. In 2014, while serving her time at the Maryville Reformatory for Women, Brown was accused of making threats towards a woman who was seeking custody of Brown's son. The woman claimed that she was receiving threatening letters from Brown saying, "Wait till I get out." The woman was also afraid that Brown would send someone to come after her. No further information about the incident has been released. Brown will be 45 years old when she's released from prison in 2022. Now for a look into what's been described as the dumbest hitman plot ever, which all began in October 2013. It started when a Chinese real estate developer, Tan Yue, wanted to get revenge on his business competitor, a man known as Mr. Wei. Wei had filed a lawsuit against Yue's company over a dispute around a development project, and Yue was allegedly scared of the money he'd lose during the court case, so he thought it would be easier to get rid of Mr. Wei altogether. To do so, he paid a hitman 2 million Chinese yuan to kill Mr. Wei, which at the time was worth around $282,000 US. But instead of completing the task himself, the hitman decided to be his own kind of businessman and outsourced the murder to someone else. In this case, he hired another hitman who would then get to keep half of the initial payment. The problem was that hitman didn't want to carry out the hit either, so then he took a cue from the first hitman, accepted the money, and tapped in another man to complete the task. That third hitman paid the fourth hitman $38,000 up front and promised another $70,000 once the job was done. So then that hitman took the money and, like those before him, outsourced the job yet again to another hitman. He paid that guy $28,000 in Chinese yuan and promised another $70,000 when the murder was complete. And as you can see where we might be going, the murder was outsourced 4 different times over the course of 6 months until it reached the 5th and final hitman who was offered $14,000 in Chinese yuan to murder Mr. Wei, but he too had another plan. This time, though, it was different. Instead of completing the hit like intended, he met Mr. Wei in a cafe and told him about the murder-for-hire plot. He even offered to help him fake his own death. Mr. Wei agreed, and together they staged his murder. The final hitman gagged and bound Wei and took photos of him, touting his successful hit. The message was sent from an outsourced hitman to outsourced hitman to outsourced hitman until it finally got back to the first hitman, the original hire. And by that time, Mr. Wei had reportedly told it all to the police. In 2016, the case went to trial. At first, the 5 hitmen and Yan Hui were acquitted due to the lack of evidence, but that decision was appealed by the prosecution, and the case went into a second trial at the Naming Intermediate People's Court in China. The trial lasted 3 years, but eventually you and the 5 hitmen were charged with intentional homicide. In 2019, you received a 5-year jail term for initiating the murder-for-hire plot, and his hired hitmen received sentences that range from 2 to 4 years each. It was October of 2016. Stephen Portlands had just finished grocery shopping in Scarborough, a region of Toronto, Ontario, when he got a cab to help him on his way home. The driver, 55-year-old Mohammed Hakim Zada, was the owner of his own cab and limo company. As they drove, the driver talked to Stephen about his life, more specifically his wife who'd left him a year prior. Now they were battling for custody of their kids. According to Stephen, the driver talked about how he wanted to get revenge on his wife and daughter for the harm they'd caused him, that he wanted to kill his wife and her family court lawyer. Stephen, who had faced over 100 convictions himself, claimed that he initially planned to rip off the driver. He lied and told him he knew a Hell's Angel hitman from Quebec that he could connect him with. But then he started to worry that Hakim Zara would actually go through with the hit one way or another, so instead, he went to the police. Working together with the police, Stephen contacted this driver and told him he'd introduced him to the hitman he'd mentioned, Mark, who was actually an undercover police officer. Mark and Hakim Zada met several times over the next month until they eventually settled on a price of $50,000 per murder. According to the courts, Hakim Zada was paranoid about being found out, so when he met with Mark, he'd write down the most incriminating parts of the conversation out of fear of being recorded. The undercover officer, whose identity is protected under the media publication ban, said in one note, stated, "I don't want her alive," in reference to his wife. He said Hakim Zada wanted the murder to look like an accident. He also gave Mark the name and address of his wife's court lawyer, who he wanted to be killed as well. Hakim Zara told the undercover officer that he thought the lawyer should be shot while she was entering the courthouse where the custody battle was being held in busy downtown Toronto. According to the undercover officer, Hakim Zada made a throat-slitting gesture when discussing her murder. In the conversations recorded by the undercover officer, Hakim Zada said that lawyer is to be gone. When asked if he wanted the body to be found or if he wanted it to make the news, he replied, "In the news, if it's in the news, it's better." He told the undercover officer that he would pay to have his former wife disappear and to no longer exist, but then he changed his mind. Instead, he wanted to first frame his wife for a gun and drug possession. He wanted Mark to plant cocaine and a gun in his wife's car. Then Hakim Zada would call the police so she would be imprisoned. Allegedly, he wanted his wife to feel the same way he did when he was jailed for a week after being charged with violating a court order and threatening his child. The charges were later withdrawn. Mark played along and met with Hakim Zada in the parking lot of a Chapters bookstore on November 17, 2016. He showed him the cocaine and replica gun that he would plant on his wife as per their plan. The men agreed, and shortly after, he was arrested. During the trial, Superior Court Justice Robert Goldstein said Hakim Zada consistently tried to obstruct the legal process as he hired and fired numerous lawyers throughout most of the proceedings. Hakim Zada maintained his innocence during the trial and instead accused the police of trying to frame him by tampering and editing with the recordings they had. Judge Goldstein had said he was concerned about his mental health as he'd physically and mentally deteriorated over the 3 years he was in custody awaiting trial. He underwent a mental health assessment and was declared fit to stand trial. In January of 2020, Hakim Zada was found guilty on 5 counts of counseling to commit an indictable offense, including 2 murders, transfer of a firearm, trafficking cocaine, and public mischief. Judge Goldstein said he would have imposed a sentence of 11 or 12 years, but due to Hakim Zada's deteriorating mental and physical health, he lowered the sentence to 9 years. His lawyers later appealed his sentence to the Court of Appeal of Ontario in a bid for less punishment, but it was rejected by a panel of judges. Judge Goldstein said that Hakim Zada had a particular animosity towards women, specifically those that had angered him. Just as you don't need a weatherman to tell you which way the wind blows, you don't need a psychologist to tell you that Mr. Hakim Zada is a misogynist, he said. In August 2004, Marion Carver, aged 40, made arrangements for a 7-day Alaskan cruise. Traveling from Massachusetts, the Boston native flew to Seattle, Washington, and on August 27th, she embarked on the ship. Marion spent that summer solo. Divorced, her teenage daughter resided with her ex-husband in the UK, and she was unemployed, supported by a trust fund and investments. Her father described her as a very serious and independent person, and she'd been very successful in her career, allowing herself more freedoms later in life. Marion had previously been an investment banker and had done very well for herself. She was known to take solo trips without telling anyone, but this trip was different. Marion should have returned on September 2nd, but when her family couldn't reach her, they became concerned and filed a missing person report, where Mary lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts on September 7th. Police started their investigation and discovered through her credit card statements that the cruise ship tickets had been purchased along with round-trip tickets from Seattle back to Cambridge. At this point, it was several weeks after Marion had been set to return home, and police discovered that Marion hadn't arrived for her return flight. They reached out to the cruise line for more information. The cruise line was able to confirm that Marion had boarded the ship, but they couldn't confirm whether she had disembarked the boat. The cruise line had made no effort to report Marion missing. Official channels were being stonewalled by the cruise lines, forcing Marion's father, Ken Carver, to hire a private investigator to try and get some information. Through that investigation, they were able to get little information. They did discover that Marion had ordered room service on the second night of the voyage, but after that, there had been no activity on Marion's SeaPass, which was an onboard payment system used to buy food and drinks, as well as get on and off the ship. They also learned from the steward of her room that her bed hadn't been slept in after the first night, but all of her belongings were still in the room, including her purse and wallet. On the 3rd morning of the voyage, the steward reported to their superiors that Marion's room was going unused, but he had been told to do your job and forget it. Despite being told to forget about it, he continued to report that the room was being unused every day for the remainder of the trip. On the final day, the same steward asked what to do about the room as it still contained all of Marion's belongings. His manager told him to pick up the room and put the things in storage, which he did. It wasn't until Ken had reached out to the cruise line directly that they filed a missing person report and started an internal investigation, 26 days after Marion had disappeared. When they tried to track down Marion's belongings, they couldn't be located, with the cruise ship saying that the items had been donated, though other sources said that it was a common occurrence for staff members to go through left-behind items, and this is what likely happened to her belongings. Regardless, none of her things were recovered. The cruise line stated that they had no surveillance of Marion while on the ship. According to Ken, Officials from the cruise line had told him that their surveillance system operated on a 2-week cycle and the footage had been automatically deleted. However, when his lawyer subpoenaed the corporate offices, they discovered that they were actually on a 30-day system. And by the time they had been made aware of Marion's disappearance, they would have had access to that footage still, but failed to save anything from that sailing. After the subpoena, the cruise line produced a grainy photo of Marion as she had boarded, but after that, they said they had nothing. There was very little accountability from the cruise line, which infuriated Ken Carver. He was horrified that he needed to go through court orders in order to obtain any information from Royal Caribbean. Ken went through years of legal battles to get information about his daughter's disappearance, a process he said that no family should have to go through. He sued the cruise line in 2005, after which Royal Caribbean issued a statement saying that they believed Marion had committed suicide. Her family does not believe this is the case and says that they were robbed of getting answers when the cruise line was negligent in reporting her disappearance. They won their suit. Ken Carver went on to establish the International Cruise Victim Association. And in 5 years, he was able to successfully lobby Congress to pass legislation for all cruise ships to immediately report onboard crimes to authorities and be required to preserve evidence. The legislation also required all ships to make several changes to improve safety, such as have rape kits and physicians on board, install peepholes on cabin doors, as well as install more security cameras. In 2013, remains were discovered on Mary Island in British Columbia and were thought to belong to Marion, but they weren't a match. In 2020, her father passed at 83 years old after spending nearly 2 decades advocating for passenger safety on cruise ships. In February 2012, 47-year-old Fariba Amani boarded the Bahamas Celebration in Florida with her boyfriend, Ramiro Goshani. Fariba was from Port Moody in British Columbia, Canada, and her boyfriend was from Coquitlam, BC. Fariba texted her sister goodbye that morning and was never heard from again. Her boyfriend, Ramiz, reported her missing on the 29th after saying he searched the ship for her. He said that they had watched a comedy show that evening and that he had planned to hit the casino. He said that he left for Eva at the cruise line gift shop where she was picking out souvenirs at 1 a.m. He said that he spent an unknown amount of time at the casino and wasn't sure what time he returned to the cabin. He said that he did notice Fariba wasn't in yet, but wasn't concerned and went to bed. He said he woke at 7 a.m. and saw that he was still alone, and then searched for an hour before alerting staff to his missing girlfriend. A search of the vessel concluded that Fariba wasn't there, and the FBI was alerted. The FBI searched the ship 36 hours after Fariba was reported missing, as well as the waters on the ship's route, but nothing turned up in the investigation. Fariba's family were quick to let law enforcement know what they knew about Ramiz. The couple had dated for 8 months, and it wasn't an easy relationship. Fariba had told her sister that she thought Ramiz was cheating on her and had considered hiring a private investigator. Family members noticed that Ramiz was very domineering and controlling of Fariba, and she had also mentioned that she was scared of him and wanted to leave the relationship. Fariba's family had also never met Ramiz and said that Fariba hadn't wanted to go on the trip due to her wanting to end the relationship with Ramiz. But it said that they had bought and paid for the vacation months earlier, and she wanted to make the most of it. Fariba is a mother of 2 adult children. She is reported to not drink alcohol and had no reason to abandon her life. Initially, the FBI concluded that they didn't believe foul play was involved in Fariba's disappearance, but her family disagrees with that finding. Ramiz was cleared of all wrongdoing by the FBI and was allowed to return to Canada. Fariba's family filed a missing persons report, but the RCMP has stated that there isn't enough evidence to investigate Ramiz in the disappearance. Fariba's sister continues to advocate for her and hopes that one day there are answers. On March 21, 1998, Amy Lynn Bradley embarked on a week-long cruise aboard the Rhapsody of the Seas. The 23-year-old was accompanied by her parents and her brother, Brad, with the cruise being a perk from her father's job. While Amy's parents were excited to share the news of the all-expenses-paid Caribbean cruise, Amy herself had reservations about the trip. Despite being a proficient swimmer and a coach for lifeguards, she harbored a deep-seated fear of the ocean and boats, particularly uneasy about the vast, unfamiliar waters. Amy was sold on a trip by her family and looked forward to spending time with them and take a break from school. Amy was close with her family and had a close bond with her younger brother. Amy had even chosen to go to college close to home to be near her family. She was pursuing a master's degree in sports psychology. The family flew from Chesterfield County, Virginia to Puerto Rico and boarded the ship there. The first 2 nights of the trip, everything was normal. They were all having a blast exploring the amenities of the ship and enjoying their holiday. On March 23rd, the ship had a day stop in Orange's Tad, Aruba, and the family explored the area together. They returned that evening for dinner and then headed to one of the clubs on the ship. Videos from that evening show it wasn't very crowded and was a pretty tame affair. Brad said that they were dancing and having a few drinks, and they were with their parents after all. At 1 a.m., the ship departs Aruba en route to Carousel, and shortly after, the Bradley parents retired for the evening, leaving their adult children to enjoy their night without their parents. Amy and Brad went to one of the 24-hour nightclubs on board to see a show put on by the house band, the Blue Orchid. They danced for a few more hours, but went back to their room around 4 a.m. where they sat on their balcony chatting about the day until around 5 a.m. Brad remembered Amy mentioning she wanted to deboard in Carousel to purchase more cigarettes. Brad called it a night and left Amy, who said that she wasn't feeling very well and she wanted to sit outside for some fresh air. Brad told her good night and went to bed. At 5:30 a.m., Amy's father wakes up and sees Amy on the balcony still. He notes both of his children are safe in the room and goes back to sleep. They had plans to get up early that morning, have breakfast together, and then explore Carousel all day. He woke up 20 minutes later and notices the plastic chairs on the balcony were empty. Not alarmed initially, he got up and started to get ready. He assumed Amy had gone to get coffee, and he thought he would find her where they normally had breakfast. He looked around for Amy on deck, but couldn't find her. He searched the ship for an hour, and there was still no sign of his daughter. He went back to the room and woke his wife and Brad, who joined him in helping search the ship. After looking at all the usual places they expected to find Amy, they reached out to the crew staff. They begged the captain not to allow passengers to deboard until a complete search had been undertaken. The captain of the ship said that he would ask the crew staff to do an investigation, but he would not make an announcement or contain the ship as he didn't want to alarm other passengers. The Bradleys frantically searched the ship, hoping to find anything that would help locate Amy. None of her belongings seemed to be missing, and wherever Amy had gone, she seemed to be barefoot as her shoes were still on the balcony. Her family said that Amy never went anywhere without giving them a heads up, but her brother remembered that Amy was running out of smokes and may have left the room to find more. The captain came back saying that the entire ship had been searched, but there was no sign of Amy. He suggested she may have fallen over the rails and suggested a search of the waters. Amy's family thought that was highly unlikely because due to her fears of the ocean, she never went anywhere near the edge of the ship. At the time of her disappearance, the ship was also in shallow waters near Carousel. Someone would likely have seen her fall, or she could have easily swum back to land had she fallen. Her parents said that Amy had been approached by several wait staff members throughout the voyage, each asking her out, and each she politely declined. And then the night that she went missing, she had been seen dancing with the man that played in the house band. According to her family, suicide was also off the table in their eyes. Amy had just gotten an English bulldog puppy that had been a lifelong dream. She was also set to start a new job after the cruise, and there were no signs that Amy was experiencing any depression or mental health issues. Members of the cruise line suggested that Amy had likely disembarked the ship that morning and could likely be in Carousel, and insisted that the family look for her there. They said that they would not hold the ship for one missing passenger and insisted they leave the ship to continue to search for her on land rather than stay on the boat. The family reluctantly disembarked, and they needed time to get in contact with the American authorities to get their help. Clearly, finding Amy wasn't in the best interest of the cruise line, and they were shocked and upset by their lack of concern. They watched that the ship departed the port, leaving them in a foreign country with no support and missing their daughter. The FBI took over the investigation and asked the family to get back on the ship. They also said that they would send agents to help search, but it had already uncovered that the investigation of the ship undertaken by the cruise employees had not been thorough, and there was a good chance Amy could still be on the ship. They flew to St. Thomas to reboard the ship on the next planned stop along with a team of FBI agents, but it was near the end of the cruise. On March 26th, 48 hours after Amy was last seen, the FBI starts her investigation on board. They also went around to other passengers with photos of Amy to see if anyone saw her that morning. The investigation starts to lead to clues. Several witnesses placed Amy with the band player that she had been seen dancing with at the nightclub the night she had went missing. Someone said that they saw her get into an elevator with him at 5:45 a.m., which, if accurate, would mean she left the room about 5 minutes before her dad had started to look for her. The man's name was Alistair Douglas, but was known as Yellow. The witnesses said that they had lined up to deboard the ship, and they saw Amy with Yellow. They said that they saw him hand Amy a dark-colored drink that could have been coffee or Coke when they disappeared from view. But Yellow came back 10 minutes later alone. This is the last unconfirmed sighting of Amy on the ship. There were several sightings of her over the years that leads the family to believe Amy was kidnapped and held captive in the Caribbean. The family was sent a photo years later of a woman in a brothel catalog, and experts believe that photo is of Amy. 2 Canadian tourists reported that they saw a woman matching Amy's description on a beach in Carousel that August, specifically remembering one of her tattoos. Amy has several tattoos: the Tasmanian devil dribbling a basketball on her left shoulder, a Japanese sun, a symbol on her right ankle, and a blue gecko lizard around her navel. She also has multiple ear piercings and her belly button is pierced, and she has a scar on her right shin. A member of the U.S. Navy also reported seeing Amy in a brothel in 1999. He said that he was approached by a young woman who said her name was Amy, and she was being held against her will. But he didn't report the sighting until years later, fearing he would be disciplined for being in a brothel while on duty. The last sighting was in 2005 when a woman said that she saw a young woman flanked by men in Barbados. She said that the woman was distraught and was being threatened. She said that she followed the young woman into the washroom, and there she said that her name was Amy and she was from Virginia and needed help. But before she could get more information, the men came in and dragged her out of the bathroom. This is a sketch of the men she saw that day. The Bradley family has a $250,000 reward for information leading to Amy's return. Additionally, the FBI has $25,000 for any information about Amy. Any sightings can be valuable in locating or solving what happened to Amy Bradley. Experts want to remind people to stay alert even while on vacation and not to take your personal safety for granted. Always let your loved ones know of your travel plans, and remember, it is always recommended to travel with someone else. Letting them know where you're going to be going and when you plan on returning. While on cruise ships specifically, if you're drinking, remember to have a sober friend, and don't take drinks from strangers, and be mindful of your surroundings. Russell and Sherry Parlier welcomed their second child, a baby girl named Ashley, into the world on October 16, 1983. From an early age, Ashley was known for her shy and reserved demeanor, coupled with a notable innocence and naivety. As she grew older, Ashley found it challenging to forge friendships, a trait noted by her older sister, Nicole Campan. Nicole remembered Ashley as exceptionally trusting. She said, "One of the biggest things I remember about her is she was so trusting and she really just saw good in people. She wanted people to be what she thought the world should be, and that was good." Ashley had beautiful brown eyes and brown hair, and her smile with crooked teeth was really pretty. Ashley also had a mild mental disability that made her function at the level of a teenager between the ages of 12-14. Despite her problems, she managed to live life enthusiastically. She graduated from Battle Creek Central High School and got a job at the nearest Taco Bell restaurant in the 800 block of Northeast Capitol Avenue. She wanted to get her own car, for which she had been saving up some money from whatever she earned at Taco Bell. But sadly, Ashley, a young woman who wanted the world to be a happy place, had tragedy waiting for her just around the corner. And despite her kind and gentle nature, the world was not kind to her. 21-year-old Ashley Parlier had a lean build. At about 5 feet 9 inches tall, she weighed only 100 pounds. So on June 12, 2005, When her parents noticed that she appeared to have a bump, they were noticeably worried. After all, Ashley was too innocent both by nature and in her mental capacity. They feared for her health, so they wanted her to see a doctor and get prenatal treatment if she decided to carry the baby. Ashley had a huge argument with her parents about the entire incident and left the house upset. She took off from her house in Bedford Township in the Urbandale neighborhood with no car, driver's license, cell phone, or credit card. However, she did have some cash amounting to about $700 with her. The family wanted to give her the time she needed to cool off, but Ashley never returned home. When minutes turned into hours and hours turned into days, the Parlier family panicked as they knew something was not right. Initially, they had believed that Ashley would spend a couple of days at one of her friend's house and cool down and then return home to them. But when she hadn't returned after multiple days and they were unable to get in touch with her, they were left with no choice but to report her missing to the police. The police did not have much evidence to work with or leads to follow, so they released Ashley Parlier's picture to the public along with her physical description in the hopes this would help them generate some leads. Along with her physical description and weight and build, they also released details of the outfit she was wearing when she went missing. She was last seen in a checkered shirt and a pair of blue jeans paired with brown leather sandals. It was not long after the police got numerous tips about sightings, especially in the Houghton Lake area. The family heaved a sigh of relief. They hoped that she would be found and they could then persuade Ashley to come back home. But the police soon gave the Parlier family bad news. All the sightings were false and cannot be confirmed. So wherever Ashley was, she was not yet ready to come back home. The investigation reached stage 2, and the officers' initial doubt landed on Sherry and Russell, Ashley's parents, who had taken a while before finally filing a complaint. Her father agreed to take a polygraph test and was cleared, but Ashley's mother, Sherry, declined to take the polygraph test. The important thing to mention here is that Sherry had already started to show signs of Huntington's disease, which was properly diagnosed a few years later. Ashley's sister, Nicole, clarified that not coming home for this long was definitely unusual behavior because Ashley had never done anything like that. But the family had believed that since they had a pretty big argument before she left, she was probably blowing off steam at a friend's place. They had assumed that she would come back home by the weekend and they would be able to work through the situation. Nicole said that her parents were the last two to see her at that time, so the police had obvious concerns. She added, "Again, we are a small-town Michigan family. We never thought that this would be a 16-year ordeal of trying to figure out where a daughter and sister is." The police also tried searching for her then estranged boyfriend. At some point in months before she disappeared, they had broken up. But police and Ashley's family believed that she was carrying his child. At the time of the interrogation, he had another girlfriend who was also pregnant. He was not ruled out as a suspect, but the detectives could not find any evidence against him. Ashley's friends and close relatives were also questioned, but again, no clue came into light. However, another angle emerged. The officers learned that Ashley may have been suicidal. The police suspected that if she had taken her own life, then they would be able to find the body somewhere. So the police actively searched for her body. Nothing of substance could be found. Then they theorized that maybe Ashley was robbed. But there had been no change in her social security number all the while she was gone. By now, the police were ready to give the Parlier family more bad news. They informed her family that they suspected foul play, and it was likely that Ashley was already dead. They also assured the family that they were not giving up on her. They continued an extensive search to find Ashley Parlier, but the case eventually went cold. Over the span of the next 18 years, several officers from Battle Creek Police Department worked on Ashley's case. Her disappearance became a mystery for the whole department because they kept finding persons of interest, but there was never any valid evidence against any of them to make them a suspect. In the year 2020, when they suspected that she might have been murdered outside of Battle Creek City, they assigned the case to the sheriff's department. It was only in 2021, when they were least expecting it, that they had a breakthrough in the case. Having gone nowhere for around 16 years, the case had turned cold. But then something happened that would change everything. Pennsylvania law enforcement contacted Calhoun County officers when they unexpectedly found a lead in Ashley Parlear's case. In January 2021, Pennsylvania detectives were questioning 44-year-old serial killer Harold David Hallman III for the murder of two different women, Tiana Phillips and Erica Schultz. At that time, Hallman asked the officers if they could merge all three cases of Phillips, Schultz, and Parlear because he did not want a trial. The police had not mentioned Ashley Parlear anywhere during the conversation. In fact, they were not sure what he was talking about, so they further interrogated him about the Parlear case, and what they found was shocking. The police had not mentioned Ashley Parlear anywhere during their conversations. In fact, they were not sure what he was talking about, so they further interrogated him about the Parlear case, and what they found was shocking. It was not just a lead, but a full-blown confession. The detectives immediately got in touch with the Calhoun County Police Department to inform them about the new development in the case. When Calhoun County PD took over, their investigative efforts revealed that Hallman had lived in Battle Creek between 2002-009, and he had been in touch with Parlear. Police learned that Hallman had been in contact with Parlear after Ashley had the argument at home. She visited him at his home in Emmett Township, Michigan. Ashley told him that her parents wanted to get a pregnancy test. Later, Ashley and Hallman ended up in an argument. So Hallman knocked her unconscious after assaulting her, and then took her to the Pennsylvania hills where he bashed her head in with a piece of wood until she did not move anymore. He also informed them that he'd left Ashley somewhere in the northern part of Newton Township and then gotten rid of his bloody clothing. Harold David Hallman III was born on November 29, 1978. He had been living in Germany with his father in his early teens until he was a young man, but then his father left for Turkey, and Hallman stayed behind to live with his girlfriend. At that time, he appeared to be a normal young man. Nobody would have guessed that he would have grown up to be a serial killer. The first time Hallman took someone's life was when he was 20 years old. Joseph Whitehurst, a 21-year-old son of an Air Force colonel, was living at a military base in southwest Germany. On May 30, 1999, he disappeared and was found outside Ramstein Air Base a few days later. He had been bludgeoned to death using a club that was found at the crime site. When German police captured Hallman for an unrelated crime, he confessed to killing Whitehurst when he had started dancing around the campfire. Hallman said that he felt threatened by Whitehurst, so he attacked him first. Hallman also told the police, "It was the biggest rush I ever felt. Like your whole body, to this day, I don't know how many times I hit him and then I was gone." Despite his confession, he was only sentenced to a 6-year term at a German reform school. According to German law, a person below the age of 21 has to be tried in a juvenile court. Besides, Hallman was also diagnosed with schizophrenia at the time, which led to a more lenient sentence. He then came back to America and lived near Battle Creek Lakeview and the Fairfax Addition in Emmett Township and was employed as a truck driver. It was around this time that he seemed to have a huge role in the disappearance of Ashley Parlear in 2005. Later, on June 13, 2018, a mother of 2 children, Tiana Phillips, disappeared. When he was finally under arrest 3 years later and police were interrogating him, he confessed that he hadn't actually wanted to murder Phillips specifically, but he wanted to kill again. Erica Schultz had doubts about meeting a person she had online conversations with. She knew him as Dave. On December 6, 2020, Erica was reported missing. Erica had autism and was a woman of habit. So when she did not show up, the police checked her phone records and connected Hallman to her murder. In his confession, he casually mentioned that killing Erica Schultz was like just another day in the park for him. When he was arrested, he was found along railroad tracks in Duncan, Pennsylvania with a self-inflicted wound. He believed he needed to die for his sins. When Hallman was receiving treatment in the hospital, he admitted to killing Schultz and Phillips. When he was in jail, he wrote a confession letter to his estranged wife detailing how he had killed Phillips, who he had relations with. He said that he wanted to confess to the crime to highlight the fact that he would never do something like that with her. It obviously freaked out his ex-wife, who took the letter to the police. She also mentioned that Hallman had claimed to have killed a woman earlier, but she had not believed him. The common characteristic of his crimes made him a serial killer. All his victims had disappeared. Every one of them had head injuries. He first attacked them and knocked them unconscious, and then he finished the job. He dumped the bodies to remote places without burying them. In fact, Calhoun County Sheriff's Department Detective John Pignatro said that Holman was in a transient and without a permanent address in Pennsylvania in 2021. He blamed his family and unsuccessful marriage for everything that happened. He believed that there are alphas and there are non-alphas. That's just the way. There's the master and there's a submissive, or whatever you want to call it. That's the way life's built. So when his wife didn't submit to him, he had to look for that dynamic in extramarital affairs. After Parlier's death, Holman researched serial killers. When he was asked about which homicide he remembered the most, he consistently answered that he remembered them all with vivid details of what he did to them. Police were sure that he was a serial killer who had to be taken off the streets immediately. In fact, Holman admitted that he hadn't been caught, he would have killed again. Holman in his confession highlighted that he had met Ashley Parlier at a bowling alley where she had been with her parents. The court paper confession also highlighted that he initiated a conversation with her, which led to deeper relations later. When she had the argument with her parents, she called Holman and then visited his place. Ashley informed him that her parents were insisting on getting a pregnancy test. He confessed that he was the father of the child that Ashley was carrying. He got enraged by their subsequent argument and knocked her unconscious. Then, on the evening of June 13, 2005, he bashed her on the head several times and killed her. He said, "It was a field overgrown middle of nowhere, Michigan, and it's 10 miles from town. There's like a garage close by or something, or a small house, but it was empty. We sat there. I sat there kind of in my own world. Ashley was in the back, just out. He consciously decided to kill her at that spot. When he realized that he had found a good enough place when he was sitting with Ashley's unconscious body by his side." He also mentioned, "I was sitting there and no cars drove by. The longer I sat there, the more I thought this is a good place as any. Then it happened. I took her out and took her to the spot and finished the job." He hit her and watched her die. Once he was sure that Ashley was no more, he went home and took a shower. Later, he disposed of his clothing at his then place of work at Meijer, an American supercenter. What is even more shocking is that he followed up the case for years. He even went to check on Ashley's remains at one point but only found bones. Upon further questioning, he came forward with an apology to the Parlier family. Holman denied having planned it out. He said he did not want that to happen with Ashley. He went on to say that he regretted Ashley's murder more than any of them. It should be noted that this confession was released in recent years at a time when he had already taken multiple lives. Nicole, Ashley's sister, could not control her emotions when she got to know that Holman said that Ashley had gone over to him for help, and she was just confused. She was horrified that despite this knowledge, Holman had murdered Ashley in cold blood. Holman believed that things had gone out of hand, and he lost control and killed her. On one hand, he said that he felt so bad after ending her life that he was drunk for 3 weeks straight. He wanted to forget that it had ever happened. On the other hand, he explained the entire killing process gave him a kind of ultimate adrenaline rush that could be compared with nothing. Nicole was disheartened to know that his apology was just another way of showing his heinous act off. She said it was really hard for them not knowing. "My mother, her Huntington's, progressed very quickly due to grief and depression. My father was the same. Being a parent myself, I know what they were going through. It's hard to understand what type of person could do that. I could never imagine wanting to hurt someone that badly." Holman accepted that he could say no words to comfort the family, but he would be willing to beat up with a log if they wanted to do that. Nicole was not happy with the apology. She not only lost her sister, but also lost her parents, who died in grief and confusion. She believed that Holman took more than just Ashley's life, and it was the truth. The number of people Harold Holman had killed was more than just the number of his direct victims. Many of his victims' loved ones had passed away never knowing what happened to their family. Nicole made a social media page with the name, "Bring Ashley Home," through which she got in touch with the older sisters of the other Pennsylvania victims. They believe that they are bonded by sadness and have developed friendships. She said that the other older sisters of the other Pennsylvania victims are going to join Nicole when she gives her victim impact statement on behalf of the whole Parlier family on April 10th at Holman's trial. She said, "We're going to remember our sisters. We're going to remember Ashley and Tiana and Erica and not him. We're going to remember how they were good people who loved and were caring, and he's just going to rot." It had been 18 years since Ashley left her house after arguing with her parents. She never returned home. After what happened to her, the police were determined to bring her back home. They turned over every stone possible to find answers over the years. So when Harold Holman came forward with the confession, the police wanted him to show them the place where he had left Ashley's body. The officers in prosecution believed that the case of Ashley Parlier was a very emotional and very labor-intensive case. It had been almost 2 decades since the first investigative officers tried finding answers. Over the years that followed, multiple detectives were assigned to the Parlier case when they couldn't find the answers within the city. They even traveled across the country to locate potential witnesses and find necessary evidence against the culprit. Sheriff Steve Hinckley informed the media in March that the officers had traveled to California, Maryland, and Pennsylvania to investigate Parlier's case. Calhoun County Sheriff's Department, Detective John Pignatro, Detective Dave Huminga, and Detective Sergeant Chris Suarez of the Michigan State Police were part of the investigation team. Holman led the police to a wooded area at a 6.5-mile road in Newton Township, which is south of Battle Creek. Almost 24 officers searched for Ashley's remains on March 30th, 2022. After they carried out the search for several hours, they could not find her body. People residing in the area informed the media that at the time of Ashley's disappearance, the area used to be farmland. But within a few years, the entire area was divided up and sold to different property owners. All the efforts by the officers went in vain. Holman admitted that after all these years and the development that had happened in the area, he could not properly place where he had left Ashley. The police are still on the hunt to find Ashley's remains. Unsurprisingly, the man who had already killed 3 women and possibly more was afraid to get the death penalty. He was sentenced to 2 terms of life in prison. He was not granted any form of parole. In February of 2023, Holman pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of Ashley Parlier. He agreed to help Calhoun County Police find the remains of Ashley in the area where he allegedly disposed of her. It is part of the plea deal with the Luzerne County District Attorney's Office in exchange for not receiving the death penalty. He faces up to another life sentence in prison and is scheduled to be sentenced in April 2023. The Calhoun County Sheriff is still looking for any information that would be useful in Ashley Parlier's case and finding her body. If you know something, then contact the Office of Calhoun County Sheriff at 269 to 78,108.80. Every minute is difficult when a loved one goes missing. Imagine 18 years of hurt, grief, and sadness with only a tiny sliver of hope that someday they could return. Imagine the confusion about whether to keep waiting or just leaving the saddening experience behind. Ashley's parents, Sherry and Russell, died in the spring of 2020 without ever knowing what happened to their daughter. Imagine the pain and the agony they suffered in the end when they realized that they would never get to know what happened to Ashley, especially since she had left the house being angry with them. Imagine how they had to live their lives when everyone from true crime enthusiasts to police to the media had active suspicions against them about the disappearance of their own daughter. But Ashley's story finally received closure. Even if it was after 18 years, she may have not come home yet as the police are still trying to find her remains. But at least her family knows what happened to her. On March 13, 1981, during a routine city cleanup operation, a Department of Transport worker was clearing concrete culverts along Interstate 90 off Highway 23 in Beaver Creek Township. While raking away debris, he made a startling discovery: skeletal remains. The worker promptly alerted his supervisor, who then contacted the police. Upon arrival, law enforcement sealed off the area and conducted interviews with everyone present. The supervisor informed authorities that the culverts were cleared annually, with the last cleanup having taken place on October 21, 1980. Investigators surmised that the body may have been dumped in the culvert anytime between October 1980–1981. Forensic technicians and crime scene investigators removed the body and worked to collect any possible clues that may have been left behind. The body was transported to Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office. Identifying the John Doe proved to be a difficult task for the medical examiner. The body had been badly decomposed and was barely recognizable. From what remained of the near-complete skeleton, the coroner determined that John Doe to be a white male between the ages of 30 to 50 years old. His estimated height was between 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 8 inches. There was no way to determine weight, hair, or eye color given the condition of the body, nor were there any distinguishing birthmarks or tattoos. The cause of death was listed as a homicide, with the coroner remarking that there was a possibility the victim had been shot. There had been a wound to the skull that was consistent with a small caliber gun, but no gun or shell casing was found in the area. Plaster casts of his teeth were taken for dental record purposes, and DNA samples were extracted from the remains. Getting fingerprints had proved impossible as his fingertips had disintegrated with decomposition. The victim was found clothed in green cotton work pants, a leather belt, and boxer shorts. He wore either light tan or white slip-on engineer boots size 8 to 9 and 2 pairs of green socks on each foot. In his possession was a black plastic comb and a locket with a baby's picture on the inside. Using this vague description, investigators began an extensive search on the area, questioning the workers from the Department of Transport who had worked the area since the previous October. A rough sketch was developed by a police artist along with details provided by the medical examiner. Posters were made and circulated in and around Beaver Creek Township. They also questioned motorists who used the road frequently about any unusual activity in the area. Locals to the area were questioned regarding the John Doe, who was found in the culvert, but no one seemed to recall anyone fitting his description. A search of missing persons databases in and around Minnesota yielded no results, and it seemed as if no one knew who this man could be. A lack of leads ultimately led to the case growing cold. No one had come forward to report anyone missing in the area. Although police periodically looked over the file, nothing new came of the information. As technology advanced, DNA profiles of known criminals were becoming digitized in order to allow law enforcement to have quicker and easier access to records. A profile had been developed of the Rock County John Doe back in 1981 and was used to search for him on national criminal databases. However, this too proved futile as there was no records of the victim found. The case lay cold for decades without any new information. In 2018, genetic genealogy began changing the face of criminal investigations. Having used this new technology to track down and capture the infamous Golden State Killer, other law enforcement agencies soon took notice. This technology, they believed, would surely be a game changer in identifying unsolved cold cases. The Rock County Sheriff's Office partnered with the nonprofit agency, the Doe Network, in August 2022 and reopened the Rock County John Doe case. They developed a digital composite sketch from the autopsy photos of the John Doe that was uploaded to their site and all other missing person databases. The next task was to raise enough funds to pay for DNA testing. Through community initiatives and fundraisers, the Sheriff's Office were able to reach their target and pay for all the tests needed to perform the task. Working with the genealogy websites, volunteers from the Doe Network used the DNA samples provided by the Sheriff's Office to start tracing familial connections. After a few months of poring through thousands of family trees, they were able to find a familial mat in Omaha, Nebraska. The team then made contact with the woman who said she didn't know of any relative who had lived in Rock County or went missing but was willing to meet with them. After contacting agents from the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and investigators from the Rock County Sheriff's Office, officials made their way to Omaha in early November 2022, and Omaha investigators met with the members of the Gadiano family and the woman who was the closest match to John Doe's profile. The family members volunteered their DNA for testing. On December 20th, 2022, investigators discovered that 2 of the profiles matched the strongest against their John Doe's profile. They returned to Omaha with the results and met with the woman who uploaded her profile to the genealogy website along with her aunt and uncle. During interviews with the family, detectives discovered that the woman's aunt actually had a brother who had gone missing in 1971 named Louis Anthony Gadiano. When they showed investigators a picture of Louis, they knew they had found their John Doe. The family could not provide much information about Louis' life as many of their family members had since passed. Louis would have been born sometime in 1946. What they did reveal to investigators was that Luis had been a notorious bank robber in the 1960s. According to his family and archived news articles, Luis had first been accused of robbing a bank in his hometown of Omaha. He was eventually caught while trying to rob a First National City Bank in New York on January 25, 1966 for $96,400 when he was 20 years old. According to reports, Luis was overpowered by the bank teller and ended up shooting the counter instead. He had injured his hand in the scuffle. The article states that Luis told detectives he had been desperate and depressed and wanted his life to be over. Luis was charged with attempted robbery, felonious assault, and weapons possession. Since then, family members heard from him infrequently, but all communication had ceased from 1971. He was not reported missing at the time because he had a strained relationship with his family. They were just as baffled to hear. He had been murdered 10 years after losing contact with his family. No one had ever come forward looking for Luis since he had been missing. For investigators, half the battle has been won as they know their John Doe's identity. Rock County Sheriff Evan Verbrugge said the moment was bittersweet. While it's not news anyone wants, Luis Gadiano's family, at long last, has some answers. And while there's still much more to be learned about Mr. Gadiano's death, knowing his identity, even decades after he died, is a critically important new clue in this case, he said. For Brooks, that the case will remain open despite the uphill challenge. It's going to be difficult for us to find out, but our job is to try and get answers, and the cost is minimal, he said. Authorities urge anyone who may have known Luis Anthony Gadiano between 1971 and 1981 or has any other information about the case to come forward and contact the Rock County Sheriff's Office. On November 11, 1995, in a wooded area near Bradford, Wisconsin, a group of hunters were in pursuit of a herd of deer. Gary Gilbank, eager to impart his love of hunting to his nephews, led them through the woods, only to stumble upon a scene straight out of a horror movie. As they reached the southern bank of Turtle Creek, their hunt came to an abrupt halt. Spread across the ground were the skeletal remains of a man, a baffling and unsettling discovery for them all. They owned the very land the skeleton lay on, and none of them knew who it belonged to or how it came to be here. Without hesitation, they contacted the police. Investigators arrived and immediately cordoned off the scene to begin their investigation. He appeared to be laying on his belly with his hands over his head. His head and back were partially covered by a denim jacket, and he had been wearing a t-shirt with the name of the British band, Venom, on it and a plaid shirt. He also wore gray camouflage pants, and there was one Nike sneaker next to the body. The other was not found. Investigators collected a chrome pendant of a horned goat, a Budweiser lighter, an Aquatech wristwatch, and a tube of Carmex lip balm from the scene. The remains were removed and transported to the coroner's office for further examination. The coroner began an extensive examination of John Doe. There had been no signs of trauma visible on the remains. His height was estimated to be between 5 feet 4 inches and 5 feet 6 inches with his weight at 140 pounds. His estimated age was between 17 to 20 years old. Using a dental analysis, the coroner determined that he had been a Caucasian male. He had received good dental care with only 2 fillings. He still had his wisdom teeth intact, with 2 having partially erupted and 1 being impacted. Samples of hair were taken for a toxicology analysis. There was no trace of cocaine, codeine, or morphine, which ruled out the possibility of an overdose due to long-term opioid addiction. But the coroner did not rule out that he may have been intoxicated or had taken hallucinogenic drugs prior to his death. His cause of death was not determined, but it was possible that he had died from hypothermia after falling into the creek. The coroner believed that it was possible he may have been intoxicated and become disoriented before deciding to lay down and had died as a result of exposure to the elements. There had also been speculation as to his exact time of death. The coroner estimated that he may have died around fall or winter of 1994. Investigators had no leads apart from the clues they found in the John Doe at the scene. They launched a full-on investigation that led them down several paths. In the meanwhile, John Doe's skull was cremated, and the ashes together with his remains were buried at the Johnson Town Center Cemetery used to bury John and Jane Doe's. Working on the theory that he may have been intoxicated and disoriented, investigators searched all known accidents that occurred around the estimated time of John Doe's death. They believed he may have been the survivor of a car wreck and had wandered off after the accident. However, no reports were made of a missing man fitting his description. In fact, there had been no missing persons reports made of any man fitting John Doe's description. Investigators then revisited all rock concerts that were held in the area based on the clothes he was wearing at the time he was found. People from within the heavy metal community were interviewed, but no one remembered anyone who fit John Doe's description. They had reached another dead end here. Given his estimated age, they searched through school yearbooks and government records, but found none of the teenagers in that time period were reported missing. Interviews with the students from the local school district provided no leads either, leading investigators back to square one. The investigation then turned to several witness statements about a man that was dubbed River Guy by the locals. According to witnesses, on October 16, 1994, at around 5:30 p.m., a young man in his early 20s was seen running toward the creek where the body was eventually discovered. Witnesses alleged that the River Guy was wearing clothes similar to the John Doe and had been intoxicated and distraught that afternoon. Statements made by these witnesses include that the man had been stumbling along toward the creek and had fallen several times into the water as he tried to climb the embankment. They also alleged he had yelled at bystanders to get away from him, and he mentioned being wronged by a woman named Mary and being a fugitive. The theory remained one of the strongest until later forensic tests proved that River Guy and John Doe may not have been the same person due to time discrepancies. According to later forensic estimations, the John Doe's rate of decomposition showed that he may have died around May 1995 and not in October 1994 when River Guy was last seen. This also dispelled the initial estimated time of death given by the original medical examiner. The next lead came in the form of a pendant found at the scene. In 2010, detectives from the Rock County Sheriff's Office traced the pendant back to a Janesville area craftsman. The man had been active in the local metal rock scene and had crafted several rock and metal-inspired pieces for fans. When shown the pendant, he told police that it was indeed one of his pieces. However, he made several similar pendants and over the years had sold them to dozens of people. When shown a composite sketch of John Clinton Doe, the craftsman was unable to recognize him as a possible customer. This caused yet another hurdle in the investigation. In 2014, the Rock County Sheriff's Office teamed up with the Smithsonian Institution scientist to perform an isotopic analysis of the John Doe's bones. Isotopic analysis has been used in forensic anthropology to determine the region of origin of unidentified human remains. From bone tissue, forensic scientists can determine the region of birth of a person. The Smithsonian scientists discovered that John Doe had spent a significant amount of time in the Midwestern area around the Great Lakes. These areas included the states of Wisconsin, Illinois, Minnesota, and Michigan. This information allowed investigators to narrow down the field of investigation. Having identified the John Doe's possible birth area, investigators went back to the drawing board in 2016-16 and reworked the composite sketches developed by the Rock County Sheriff's Department and the FBI in 2013 and 2014, respectively. This time, they regressed the sketch to age 16 and added some color before distributing it to the public. Private investigator Jack Fries said that the department hoped it would refresh the memory of anyone who may have interacted with him that year. The whole idea here is to get people to think about what was going on in the early 90s and in their lives. And do they have any connection with this guy at all? He said. Their attempts had failed, but investigators were not to give up so easily. For the next 2 years, private investigator Jack Fries continued to work finding a way to identify the young John Doe. In June 2018, Fries together with Detective Corin Billhorn reached out to the DNA Doe Project, a nonprofit volunteer-based group that helps with identifying unsolved John and Jane Doe cases. Using the DNA extracted and preserved from the original autopsy, the team set out to find the identity of the John Doe. In partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, FluGen Genetics, Aerodyne Research Inc., and Full Genome Corporation, the long journey began. Using genetic genealogy and ancestry website GeneMatch, the research team were able to locate and find possible relatives of John Clinton Doe in February 2019. They had a tentative identity, but investigators needed to be 100% sure. Over the next 3 years, University of North Texas as they tracked down relatives of the John Doe. Upon interviewing with the relatives, they discovered that 2 of the volunteers may share a half-sibling relationship with the John Doe through their father. Country officials applied for and received a warrant to exhume the body of the potential father in late 2021. Once DNA was extracted, testing once again began in earnest, and they finally announced the identity of John Clinton Doe. On June 14, 2020, Rock County Sheriff's Office announced that Carl Isaacs Jr., age 20, was identified as the body in the creek. Carl was born on April 30, 1974 in Delavan, Wisconsin. His parents divorced when he was very young, and it seemed that he had never quite recovered from the trauma. Carl had attended an alternative high school for Badger, Delavan Darien, and Elkhorn area high school students. In 1991, at age 17, Carl had developed a substance addiction. He had also joined a group of friends who engineered a crime spree resulting in damage to property and multiple burglaries. In March 1992, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for burglary and vandalism of golf carts at the Delbrook Golf Course in Delavan. Between April of 1992 and fall of 1993, Carl was sent to 3 different prisons, finally settling at the Oak Hill Correctional Institute in Oregon, Wisconsin. While there, he had been released to undergo a substance abuse recovery program at a halfway house in Madison. He was also occasionally allowed to return to his mother's home under house arrest. Carl sometimes played the role of informant to authorities in drug-related cases. In April 1995, he had been on one of his house arrest visits. On April 16, 1995, he had suddenly disappeared. He was never heard from or seen again. A county judge immediately signed an arrest warrant for Carl for probation violation that had been renewed annually until April 2018. Investigator Jack Fries pointed out that no one had really come forward reporting Carl Isaacs as missing during the time he disappeared, which complicated their investigation. In this case, mom and dad were divorced. He was kind of living with his mom, although I don't think he stayed there very often. He was kind of on the streets, basically homeless. I don't think he had a friend, nobody at all, who would have missed him to the point where they tried to find him, he said. Fries believed that something drove Carl to break the rules of his probation and leave his house. During the announcement of the identity of Carl Isaacs Jr., at the press conference held on June 14, 2022, Rock County Sheriff Troy Knudsen said that it was a sad moment, but also a resolution to a decades-long mystery. I'm kinda sad to have to get together and discuss the untimely death of a young individual in our community, but I'm glad to finally be able to bring a little bit of resolution to the individual's identity. Knudsen declined answering any questions as to why family never reported him missing or any details about them. He did, however, indicate that the family had been bracing for the news following the discovery of the DNA matches and the investigation. Instead, he reminded all those present that the case was still ongoing. We're really looking to flesh out exactly who he was and how he found himself in that particular location. That's where we're looking to the community to help provide some of those details for us, he said. Nansen added that the investigation was a lengthy process, but with the help of technological advancements, it made the identification possible. He thanked and credited Jack Fries, who was a former employee of the Rock County Coroner's Office who assisted voluntarily on the case. He also thanked the DNA Doe Project, which provided police with investigative breakthrough that helped identify Carl Isaacs. Nick Gilbank, who was the man that discovered Carl's body, still remembers the moment he found the body in the creek. I walked over to see what I was looking at, and there next to a garbage bag of his belongings was a clothed skeleton. I remember kneeling down and picking up the shirt, and there was a skull completely decomposed. Although he still has some questions, he is glad that there is some kind of closure in knowing John Doe's identity. I guess I'm glad they finally identified the remains, he said. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.